Fantastic. Well, welcome and thank you for joining us for today's Bridge Lunch Break event focused on inflation's impact in Michigan. My name is Amber DeLinde. I'm Bridge's Membership and Engagement Director, and I'm so happy to see all of you here today. This is the latest in our monthly event series that we call Lunch Break, and is brought to you by Bridge Michigan. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Bridge, but if someone sent you a link and said, hey, you might be interested in this and you don't know much about Bridge, you can read us every day at www.bridgemi.com. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan news source covering Michigan across the state. So today we are joined by a panel of special guests who will be talking with us today about inflation's impact on Michigan's businesses, employees, and consumers. We're really honored to be joined by each of you. Our panelists today are Scott Ellis, Executive Director of the Michigan Licensed Beverage Association, Joanne Shu, Director of Surveys of Consumers and a Research Associate Professor at the Institute for Social Research at the University of Michigan, Andy Johnston, Senior Vice President at the Grand Rapids Chamber of Commerce, and Sandi Smith, Associate Broker and President at Trillium Real Estate. Today's conversation is moderated by Bridge Business Editor Paula Gardner. Our conversation will begin in just a moment, and Paula will lead the discussion with our panel for about 40-45 minutes, and then we'll turn to your questions. Please type your questions into the chat at any time to stay muted throughout the conversation. As you heard at the beginning, we are recording this conversation and we'll post that recording on Bridge's website this week. So if you missed it, or if you know someone who missed it and wants to check it out, you can share it with them, or you can watch it again. As you may know, events like this one are made possible by the support of Bridge members. If you'd like to join our membership community, we'll drop a link to do so in the chat during today's discussion. And I will now pass the baton to Paula to get us started.
Thanks, Amber. I'm excited to get to talk about inflation because it seems like it's absolutely everywhere, and it just seems to be moving quickly. Like we just don't know where this is going to end. And I think this is one of those situations where we're all in it together in a sense, but also uncertain of where it's going to go. I wanted to just start the conversation by asking each of our participants here for an example of how inflation is touching your own lives. And the example I'm going to give actually came from a reader this week who told me about trying to buy 7 discretionary items on Amazon recently. She got ready to check out and all of the prices changed while she had been deciding what she was going to buy. And the price increases ran from like 25% to 54%. She ditched 5 of the things, left 2 in her cart, and decided she was going to take a little bit of time to decide if she was going to actually follow through on the purchase. What are you guys doing? What kind of choices are you all making or seeing? Scott, would you like to start?
Sure. And thanks for having me today. I appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, even just family-wise, I have, my wife and I have 2 boys, 14 and 15, and they grow out of shoes in weeks, it seems like. And, just purchasing shoes and food, and they play sports. So we're on the go. We unfortunately, we eat out, and the cost has been through the roof. And I, think it's starting to impact us. I got my latest utility bill and it went up $120 a month. Starting next month, I'm on that budget plan or whatever, so I know what it is, and it's up $120. So immediately we're adjusting how we spend personally and what we do because of it. And I think it hits everybody at a different time, and it's finally really besides filling up my car, which we've all been dealing with for a while, it's starting to hit us in utilities and the monthly bills.
Thank you. Sandi, how about you?
Yeah, hi, Paula. I think mostly it's in gasoline for us. Certainly we drive a lot in our industry, and we make a distinct effort to fill up at the membership places. I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about where that might be, but anyways, there's savings there for sure. And we just make that effort to go that extra mile. It pays off.
Great. Andy?
Yeah, similar. I mean, the price of eggs kind of shocked our household a lot. We eat a lot of eggs, and boy, that price has gone up quite a bit. And then when I think about, my workday life, a major project, a 24-story, building was just scrapped partially due to inflation and rising costs. And that would have changed the skyline in Grand Rapids. So you're seeing, these impacts of inflation coupled with other factors, of course, just rippling through the economy.
Thank you.
And I would also point out, Paula, the way you kicked it off, none of us have lived through this as like leaders of businesses either, really, like where we're dealing with a very inflationary environment, and then this talent challenge on top of it. So for people in leadership positions, leading organizations, companies, others, like this is the first time we've dealt with this. So I'm hearing that from CEOs as well.
Thank you. And Joanne.
So over the summer, I moved from Washington, D.C. to Ann Arbor, Michigan for my new position here at the university. And so, rising prices and with respect to the move, furnishing my new home, even searching for a new home in the tight housing market, all of these things were very salient to me as I was relocating my household. And at the same time, I'm just looking at this data with the surveys of consumers and seeing how Americans nationwide are being affected by this just in the same way that I am.
Yeah. Well, could you give us an overview of what you're seeing with your research and how it might be changing a little bit, if at all?
Absolutely. In the surveys of consumers, also known as the Michigan survey, consumer sentiment has reached its all-time historic low in June of this year. And this was primarily on the backs of high inflation. And even though inflation is taking out a larger chunk of paychecks and budgets of lower income consumers, we're hearing from consumers across the income distribution who are really being affected by high prices, and that's influencing their consumer sentiment. Indeed, I think about half of consumers are telling us that inflation is eroding their living standards. And usually high income consumers have higher levels of sentiment than lower income consumers, but right now they've converged over the last year. And that tells us how pervasive inflation is. And on top of that, higher income consumers are also being affected by gyrations in the stock market. And so they're kind of being hit on two sides with respect to both their spending as well as their wealth.
I think one of the things that I saw recently is that while confidence is low, your survey is showing that people are still expecting the labor market to stay strong. And where are the connections or disconnections in those readings?
So labor markets, as we all know, is at historically strong levels. Unemployment rates are extremely low. And so it's kind of unusual that consumers have such low levels of sentiment or confidence in spite of, strength in their income, strength in their labor market expectations. Part of the thing is that people are, that we're in a very emotional moment right now with the impact of high prices, hitting you every single day, along with, dealing with a pandemic for a couple of years, as well as political polarization. And, with all the uncertainty with political policies and the election coming up, we're in this kind of unprecedented confluence of uncertain, anxiety-provoking factors, which makes people feel very dismal about the outlook for the economy, in spite of the fact that labor markets are very strong. So the fact that incomes are strong has supported consumer spending so far and has supported economic growth. But if there's any weakness that starts to appear in labor markets, I'd expect that to turn pretty quickly.
I see your data like repeated everywhere. The Fed tracks it, everybody tracks it, and it isn't policy, it affects policy. And I'm wondering, how is it affecting policy differently right now, possibly, if it is?
So the Federal Reserve watches our inflation expectations very closely. So we ask consumers what they think how prices will move in the year ahead, as well as the 5 to 10 year ahead time horizon. And Chair Powell of the Federal Reserve mentioned in June that the readings of this 5 to 10 year inflation expectations was something they took notice of, and was one of the reasons for the first of what has become a series of 75 basis point rate hikes. And so policymakers, particularly at the Fed, are looking very closely to make sure, in hopes that consumers aren't, that their inflation expectations aren't being entrenched. So far, inflation expectations for the long term have been reading at a pretty narrow band, 2.9 to 3.1% a year for the last 15 months. So they haven't become unmoored, they haven't gone crazy, but they're still higher than the Fed would like to see, and they'll certainly be continuing to monitor this going forward.
Interesting, thank you. I'm also curious though, as you read your data, what are the generational differences that you're seeing? I consider people who might be preparing for retirement and how that might be different. And of course, people on a fixed income, we see Social Security increasing right now. So there's like this fixed solution, I guess, to inflation coming, or structural change coming because of inflation. But I mean, back to my original thought, like what is the generational difference that you're seeing right now? What should we take away from it?
That's a great question. So historically speaking, it's actually almost always the case that younger consumers tend to have higher sentiment than older consumers, whether times are good or whether times are bad. And that's certainly something that we're continuing to see right now. And absolutely, older consumers, particularly those approaching retirement age, have very special considerations. Those on a fixed income are really, and we know that many older Americans left the labor force maybe earlier than expected as a result of the pandemic. And so there aren't as many opportunities as there may have been in previous periods to generate more income to cover the bite that you're getting out of these budgets. And older Americans also have this additional hit that they're getting from the stock market. Older folks who remain in the stock market or are nearing retirement with more stock holdings than younger folks who are at the earlier part of their earnings profile. They're going to be really affected, and their sentiment is also very much affected by the turmoil in the stock markets right now. I mean, stock markets have fallen so precipitously since last December, and that's certainly hitting older Americans, much more so than younger Americans who have plenty of time to recover their assets.
One of the things that you mentioned about like the 5 to 10 year look ahead, Andy, I'm wondering what you thought when you heard that, because it seems like businesses might not be able to plan 5 days out right now, much less 5 years.
Yeah, and just building off the last question, I think generationally, talking to the Seaman College of Business here at GVSU, we've been seeing actually wage growth in those younger workers, steadily increase. I think that's very interesting to watch how that plays out, especially with the demographic tension that we're going to continue to have, especially in Michigan, but across the country. And, as much as we like to put an emphasis on policies that are being set by government, a lot of it has to do with the demographics impacting, the economy. I think once we get a hold of this inflation, we will we'll still be wrestling with that. But for the 5-year outlook, it's really interesting right now because you talk to like members of the Grand Rapids Chamber, and a lot of them are like, man, people I talk to, things seem pretty good still. They're not seeing as many of the storm clouds, but when you talk to the economists, they're like, nope, it's coming. Things are cooling. Things have been happening in the last month. It's such an uncertain time that folks who track this closely, they say, usually I know it's like set it and forget it. I kind of know what the economy is going to do. Now they're looking at data on a monthly basis to really get a factor on what's happening. In the Kent County area, we saw the number of new job openings drop in kind of a big way in September. So maybe that's a precursor to things that are happening, those new job starts. So it is getting a bit harder to plan in advance for 5 years, that's for sure. Especially, I mentioned it's unprecedented having to deal with inflation. Talent has the upper hand in the first time in decades, right? And management and companies are having to cope and deal with that. Obviously, GM's big, hey, we're bringing you back to the office. Oh, whoa, we're not. We want you to stay. Kind of announcement is indicative of what a lot of business people are dealing with right now.
And Scott, you're kind of on the front lines of a lot of that. What kind of decisions are your members making, or even you and yourself in your own business?
So, if you, and I'm sure Joanne can attest to this, hospitality industry, eating out is one of the first things that take a hit when inflation starts and when the market starts to go down. And we're seeing that. There was a survey that I read yesterday, actually preparing for this, that 53% of Americans plan on cutting back on eating out. And that's my members in the bars and restaurants. Now, there was a paragraph that said, well, the prices at the store are up so high that it may work itself out. But at the end of the day, we usually see it, and we're starting to see it, I think, as we roll into the fall, summertime's over. Our members are doing many things. One of the first things they did was our cost of salaries have went up, right? And pay has went up. We all know that we're paying more after post-pandemic and and push. We're paying higher wages. So what you're seeing some places do to cope on that level are reducing their staff number, and the owners are back. I have a member here in the Lansing area. He's owned the business for 50 years, and he was back there cooking the other day. And I go, "What are you doing?" He goes, "I don't have enough people and I can't afford it." And he's back on the fryer and back on the grill. So what we're seeing in our industry is back into rolling the sleeves up as a small business owner and getting on the floor and doing what they need to do to survive and reduce their overhead in any possible way, because that's all they can control. They can't control utilities. They can't control their electricity and all the other things. Labor is tough cost-wise to pay, hourly. They understand they got to pay more to get quality people. And so you're seeing in things that they control. And the other thing we're seeing them do is change their menus. I think you may have noticed some people think it's because of the pandemic, but you're seeing a lot more QR codes and that type of thing at bars and restaurants. And it's not necessarily for health and safety reasons only. It's also because the menu changes daily based on their costs, based on what they can actually get of out of stock items. So our members are, what we're seeing, are learning to live even more on the fly and to adjust accordingly to survive.
Interesting. Well, Sandi, I'm so curious about what you're seeing in real estate too. And aside from running a real estate office in Ann Arbor, you're also on the state board, secretary, I believe.
I'm treasurer.
Treasurer, okay.
I'll be the president in 2024.
Wonderful. So you have like this local perspective from a fairly hot market in the state, but also statewide.
And I do get an opportunity to talk with a lot of leaders statewide, and it's a pretty diverse suite of markets that we talk about. So, the Southeast Michigan and Grand Rapids are much more alike than different. And when you get a little bit more rural, it's the story changes. There's just not the job growth or creation that's driving a lot of the inventory challenges that we've seen in the other areas.
So I checked interest rates this morning. My local bank for 30 years, I'm at 7.12%. Kind of took my breath away for a second, because I remember when I was like dealing with 6%, seeming like it was pretty high. What are you seeing right now from people who are looking for a house? Are they putting the brakes on? What is that doing right now to the market?
Paul, you have to think historically, the rates have been north over the last 40 years, have been north of 7.5. And we've had them artificially low, which did exactly what it was supposed to do, which stimulated the economy and sales, and we had a crazy outcome of that. It just has been on fire, and so having it come back up again slows the pace a little bit. We do have still a severe shortage of inventory, so that's kind of the counterbalance to it, is that we still don't have enough houses for people that want to buy it. The plus is maybe we have a few less buyers in the market. And I say plus because now maybe there's only 2 offers on a house versus 10. And I think that's kind of a win-win for a lot of people. Particularly Joanne might be able to respond to this. If she was here in the summertime in Ann Arbor, there may have been multiple attempts to purchase a house. And does that outweigh a little bit higher in an interest rate? Perhaps it does. And I think people are planning on, doing a refinance. Get in the house now. You can always refinance.
Okay. But housing is such an engine for the economy too. When we couldn't find a refrigerator anywhere, 2 years ago, I think we all learned that. And like when you think about the ripple effects from your industry to others, what kind of things are you seeing there, or what are you expecting even?
Well, the most recent number that I saw was an impact of a single home sale is $77,000 in the local economy. And what we saw at the Great Recession was when we weren't selling houses, that money wasn't going back into the marketplace, and it continued to feed the downward spiral. I don't see anything like that at all in our future. I think the interest rates, they may continue to go up a little bit, but I don't see that they're gonna spike, and I don't think that inventory is gonna suddenly be wildly available. So I think we might plateau, but I don't see that we're going to go to either extreme.
I feel like there's a lot of pressure though, like even coming back to the wage discussion that we've had as part of this afternoon. Affordability has been such an issue in Michigan. And I do think about, our wages growing enough to keep pace with the housing costs, Andy's shaking his head. He's got a thought.
Well, I mean, the data that's been coming out is to show it's not, right? I mean, like the wages in general are not keeping pace with inflation, and for housing. In our neck of the woods, in the I call Greater Michigan and West Michigan, I mean, 63% of people are cost burdened by housing, and that cost burden level is 30% or more of your income going to housing. And we're still pretty good value though, because nationally that number's, I think, gone up to like 44%. People are being more cost burdened by housing. And then just to build off a little bit what we're seeing over here, based on what Sandi said, prices are cooling a bit. Rentals still high leveling, but a lot of the people, or many people, are kind of just opting out of the market. Like they're just kind of staying put right now because of the uncertainty, because of the inflation, because of the interest rates. And so what's going to uncork that supply? I mean, again, a lot of the other things that we need, the supply chain fixing, the credit, all those will help to increase supply. And that's what we need. It's supply at all levels, and more different kinds of supply, more accessory dwelling units, all those things. I believe Bridges covered it. Forgive me, Paula, if you haven't, but it's the Robinson Landing project in Grand Haven. Great example of combining market rate housing with affordable housing, about 16 of each, affordable and market rate. But you talk to the people who put that together, they're like, I don't think we could do that right now. It's so much with getting, windows, with getting financing, pulling all these partners together. So, it's definitely having an effect on housing over here.
And Paula, if I can, Andy's right on that in Michigan or the Midwest is still quite affordable, really, when you look nationwide. And we're getting a lot of people coming in from the coast, and they have cash. They don't care what interest rate it is right now. And they're coming in and they say, why pay 7% and when their cash is making 2% somewhere? So they're happy to come on in here. We've got, great, cultural institutions. We've got all the fresh water. They're happy to come in here and buy something at a fraction of the price they may be doing in California.
One of the things we do see still happening is the multifamily development. It's a much safer investment, right? Like, because when you build the multifamily, it's going to be income generating. It's not just a can I sell it or not right now situation. So that's been a continued bright spot over here.
Okay. Which of course brings up the rental market. I saw a lot of projections over the last probably 3-4 months of that probably being the next hot spot for the average consumer. If you don't own a house, your rent is, if it hasn't gone up already, it's going to go up more in the next year or so. And that just made me worry for the people who might be more vulnerable to inflation, and thinking like, as if we do see the job market change, which seems to be part of the expectation, I feel like I have to couch everything I say, and maybe you guys are too, it's kind of like it seems, or these projections might type conversation, but I don't know, that's part of the difficulty, I guess, here.
Well, it is a confluence of events that I don't think anybody has experienced. It, there's a kind of the proxy war happening that's affecting gas prices and oil prices, and this inflation. And is it out of control? Or we hear so many different things, but we have a strong job market. So all the pieces. I mean, historically, when I try to make sense of it, I think I hear things that conflict with other reports, and I try to get a handle on which direction it's going to go. But the rental market is suffering of the same inventory problem. We just haven't built enough housing. In Ann Arbor, we've put in we've taxed ourselves to build affordable housing on city land. And that's going to start creating a lot of units in places that are like in a very walkable environment. They won't be able to, they won't have to spend for automobile if they choose not to. We have ride sharing that if they need to borrow a car for an hour, they rent it at a very inexpensive rate. We're trying to do it, but that's with government intervention, in a sense, is to create that other inventory that's affordable.
Mhm. Scott, I'm curious, for some reason, this is all making me think of what bars and restaurants went through during the early couple years, basically, of the pandemic. Like policy-wise, you were hit pretty hard with restrictions and closures. And then when we talk about inflation and is it out of control, your industry has really like not felt much control, I think, for the last couple of years. Like, what does this do industry-wide right now to you, aside from the specific strategies that people are employing? Like, what are the risks here to the industry?
So you're correct. We went through a lot. Obviously, our industry was hit very hard in the pandemic. We were able to work several different legislation pieces that helped. We got some grant funding, and I have to say that both federal and state government has been good, helping us back out of the pandemic mess. But then we're rolling in now to the inflation and the cost and the labor market, and so our members are very. It's very uncertain. I can say many of my members that have closed have been in the business for a long time and said, "I'm done. I'm done. I don't want to deal with the labor market. I don't want to deal with the uncertainty. I'm done." So I do think that this industry we're a very strong industry. It does, go up and down, and we'll unfortunately see places close. You'll see some survive, and they're going to have to adapt. And I think I can easily say our industry has changed forever. The service, and I can say I've been to many places where the service is not quite what it used to be, even though this is a service industry. And part of that is, we're short-staffed. The other part is new people into the industry. After the pandemic, a lot of people realized they could work from home and get a different job and maybe not work till 2 a.m. and have these crazy hours that our industry unfortunately has. And so we're seeing that change of people leaving the industry. And so, yes, they'll come back. I have young boys, and as they go to college, I'm sure they'll get in the industry, as many of us have, to pay their way through college. So there's a lot. I guess the biggest thing, to answer it more direct, it's very uncertain, and our members are surviving. But what our industry does is, and I said it earlier, by the bootstraps. Their profit margins are always very slim in the industry, and now you have to look more on your menu. Hey, I've seen places remove tomatoes at one point because they were just so expensive or couldn't get them, and guess what? That's not on the menu for certain items anymore. And so we have learned to adapt, and we'll continue to do that. And I think the other example I use in Traverse City, I was up there towards the end of the summer, and the restaurants were done taking seating at 8 o'clock at night. They were done, and it was a Friday night or a Saturday night. A couple of reasons: one, didn't have kitchen staff, enough staff. Two, there was empty tables, but they're like, we just can't wait on you. And unfortunately, people have become very angry. And I know there's articles in the paper and said how some of these bars and restaurants, fine, we're done, we're just closing because we're going to close earlier. So it has changed. I think, and to kind of switch gears, I think Andy had mentioned it too, about people not coming back to work. I can use downtown Lansing. It's a ghost town. And I think there's plenty of apartments here available in the city of Lansing. So I still think there's still regional effects that we're feeling because of the economy and because of the pandemic, and business is not coming back. We rely heavily in the Lansing area on state employees. And as we know, there's hundreds of thousands of office space that is not a square footage of office space. It's not getting rented again. And I can look at and name a ton of buildings. I look out my window that are empty, and that affects us business-wise. Our lunches, our happy hours, and I own a distillery here in town, and we're only open Thursday, Friday, and Saturday now because Tuesdays and Wednesdays just weren't worth it anymore. And so, I guess to answer it more, it has changed, and I think people also learned staying home. Right? We all learned how we had to stay home and do things, and went, oh, this isn't so bad. I can have a cocktail at home and, still enjoy and have it, so we're seeing a change in lifestyle, and we're going to have to adapt and see how we come out of it.
I read a report in preparing for this. They were talking about some of the price increases, and they said women's suits went up about 10%. I thought, I don't know who's buying suits. I'm not going to need one probably for the rest of my life. Sorry, Andy, I see you're wearing a suit there.
Well, what's funny is I'm the president of the Michigan Society of Association for Executives, and we were talking to a copier place, and They literally said, we have every one of our employees now has a copier in their basement because of COVID. Those contracts were done. People said, take them back. I don't want them. And now they're having trouble selling copy machines because people are working from home. So, I mean, just little things you don't think of that our life has changed as a result of this, and our work environment has changed. And the ripple effect it has on every kind of business, from happy hours at my distillery to copy machines in your office. It's just really amazing, the impact. And I don't know the answers of how it ends up.
Yeah, I appreciate that regional perspective too. Yeah, I got to talk to Brian Kelly from the Small Business Association of Michigan this week. And we were talking about Frankenmuth, which is doing beautifully right now in its recovery, even though it is struggling. But he used the phrase "a tale of two cities," and just how things are so different depending on where you go in Michigan, which makes me think of, societal changes, or, like, do the weak get weaker and the strong get stronger, and what does that mean for Michigan? And just some of those like bigger picture questions. And I'm wondering, Joanne and Andy, maybe what are your thoughts on like how does this help or hurt Michigan? Where are we taking like this economic situation today, and how does it rebalance us into the future?
Well, certainly, consumers are constantly updating their information and what they're kind of expecting in the economy. And, I think consumers are still adjusting to what this new post-pandemic inflationary world looks like for their spending. And so I think there's a fair amount of uncertainty that's going on, particularly with differences across industries and workplaces about returning to the office. What I can say is that consumers, it looks like their spending remains robust, but what they're spending on is certainly going to be different than how it was before. The rise of online retail, the adjusting to supply constraints, and not being able to sometimes not being able to buy durables when the supply of durables is low. Consumers have been resilient, and they are adjusting, but I think it's too early to say that any of these adjustments are necessarily permanent.
Yeah, and from like a Michigan perspective, well, just building off what Joanne said, I think the data is showing that the savings that consumers have is just, we came out of the pandemic, we were excited, we blew a lot of our money on that stuff we were wanting, like whether it was that trip or I bought a sauna, just like, let's get crazy with all this cash inflation. And now that's going away, right? And we're kind of seeing that being reflected. The confidence is coming back. It hit this like all-time consumer confidence, all-time low in June, and it's like kind of creeping back up. But now the savings are coming back down, right around the holidays. We'll see how this goes. What does it mean for Michigan? A million years ago, somebody told me that chaos equals cash. And what I'm seeing is that different people are innovating and taking advantage of, there's this talent shortage. I've seen more consultants about talent pipeline lately pitching to governments. Like, I'll help you recruit police officers. I'll help you recruit healthcare people. So, I always think that how can Michigan take advantage of that chaos? I also think we just really need to focus on our meat and potato issues and not get distracted by all these shiny objects out here. Teach the kids to read, good roads, good infrastructure, more connections to our natural resources, if you like Four Seasons, is a big, strong point. So I think, the world is experiencing this, right? Like the world is experiencing inflation, due to war, but also really the supply chain hiccup that we all had. And it really showed how interconnected we all are. So, what I heard from Joanne too is that like some of our businesses are thinking about how can I control more of my supply chain here? What can I do myself? I think you're going to see more businesses doing that, be more conservative, planning for, more chaos, so to speak, going forward. But again, I think all this uncertainty is an opportunity for us as a state and as our different communities, as exhibited by the Frankenmuth article you wrote, Paula, of what local communities can do to try to combat this.
One question I did want to ask was, and you touched on it, is like, what are the innovations that we're seeing? I think we've heard some of this come out already in the conversation, and also who's winning? Like, what businesses are actually winning right now?
I think one of the innovations just is and changes is going to be workplace culture. I think really it gets a lot of lip service, but with this hybrid model, communicating with young employees, or I should say all employees effectively, I think is something we need to really, the successful businesses will tackle and do well. Communication is always a problem in businesses, but now with hybrid, I think that's really going to be something to tackle. I'll let others take the rest of your questions, Paula.
Anybody else who's winning? Who's
Well,
innovating?
I mean, I think, our industry, like I said, was crushed by the pandemic, but at the same time, the government did step in, which, we're not always a big fan of traditionally, but we needed it. I think when I can talk to a handful of my members that they're thriving, even though their profit margin is reduced because the cost of goods, their business has picked back up. And it's more in the food service industry. So I would say a restaurant versus a bar or nightclub. I think that's where we're seeing. I will say I was in Grand Rapids in the middle of the week, a couple of weeks ago, and I was just loving it because there was people walking everywhere. And I'm like, why can't Lansing be like this? So I think some cities, in Grand Rapids is one of them, is thriving and is taking it, is taking advantage of the situation, doing creative things to get people there, get people to move there, buy, rent, whatever it may be. I think our industry will come back strong. It always has. We've been around forever. It's just gonna be a matter of time, and it's gonna be different. So that's what I try to tell my members as well, is look, we'll continue as an association to fight for them on proper policy and things that'll help them, but we just got to keep digging hard right now, and we'll get there. People will come back out. People, when they have their money, I know we're going to see a hit, unfortunately, another hit after the pandemic because of the first thing cut is usually eating out. I think you'll see that increase as people, we bounce back. We're creatures of habit, and this industry has been around. So I do think we'll be back. It's just a matter of when. And one other side note that I read too is home delivery for food is up. So even though people are cutting back on eating out, still a lot of people are ordering your Uber Eats and things and getting it delivered, which kind of floored me because it's even more expensive, right? With the delivery fee. And even pizza, which was normally free delivery, I'm seeing that now that there's a delivery fee on it because of the gas and everything else. And pizza places are actually charging for delivery. Will that stay? Will that be something now that, hey, I got it in and it's here and I'm going to leave it forever? I don't know. That's some of the things that we're going to kind of watch and see, but we'll be strong, we'll be back, or we're going to continue. And I think we just need to take advantage of, like the previous speaker said, we need to take advantage of the opportunity and do something with it.
The delivery is flooring me. I thought that would be the first thing to go.
Me too.
Yeah.
Isn't some of that pandemic related though? I mean, people that are they're not ready to be in a crowded restaurant.
I think it is, but I also think it's generational. I have several employees that they don't go shopping to the grocery store. It's not out of fear. I don't have to. I'll pay the $10 to have it delivered. It's so convenient. I think I tell you, without sharing all my employees, but I have younger employees that you don't go out to the bar to meet people anymore. It's on your phone and you meet, and then maybe you meet there. So, I mean, their going out has changed in the lifestyle, part pandemic and part, I think, generational. It's just, my generation, we went out all the time. That's what we did. Now it's more stay home, get together at houses because they're used to being home from the pandemic, right? Now a little bit more get-togethers on the weekends. But I think it's still a little bit of fear. I think you're right, but I think a lot of it has to do with generation as well.
Okay. I want to shift to some of our participant questions here. I don't know if anybody wants to tackle this political question. But it's interesting because I see a lot of finger pointing between different parties. How much control does the US president actually have over the rate of inflation in a global economy? Joanne, maybe, as an economist, you'd want to try to tackle that one.
Sorry, trying to find my mouse and the unmute button. So I mean, certainly in this really globalized, interconnected economy, it can be very tricky to come up with policies that can really control inflation. So much is occurring these days because of global factors. The war in Ukraine is a huge factor. And even if our energy prices and domestic energy prices are not that high, we will still be affected if Europe has a long winter with energy spikes, energy price spikes as a result. So in terms of how much is directly under the government's control, it's not a lot. The Fed also doesn't have any control over that, and the Fed also can't really improve supply chain problems either. And in fact, increasing interest rates could actually exacerbate that, because it will make it harder for companies to invest, or at least more expensive for companies to invest in their production capacities. So, the way I see it, there are a lot of uncertain global factors, and unfortunately, I think there isn't a ton that's in a policymaker's a direct wheelhouse, and it's still, and any policy that comes from the Fed comes with a lag. So I think we have yet to see exactly what eventually will be the effects of these sequence of rate hikes that we've seen over the course of this year.
Oh, there's a question too about the governor. Of course, we've got an election in Michigan coming up. Andy, maybe what kind of policy might address some of this for Michigan, if anything, in the next administration? Well,
I mean, part of what Joanne's saying is what I see, right? Is that this interconnected, it's like we had this finely tuned, Olympic runner just running on the track. And then all of a sudden, they stumbled, and now we're still kind of stumbling and haven't quite caught our feet, because the economy was just, running, and it was like consistent for like the last, years going into the pandemic. And we're still trying to catch our feet, with, government, state and national decisions. Yeah, they infused a lot of money into the economy with citizens and consumers. Was there a hangover for that drunken spending? As Scott knows, yeah, there's always a price to pay for happiness today, and the price you pay tomorrow a little bit, right? And so I think we are seeing those things. I think what I'm focused on going forward from a policy perspective is government needs to focus on the nuts and bolts. They need to focus on regulation to let entrepreneurs do their thing in the market. And then where we can support economic inclusion, right? Reducing those barriers to getting back in the workforce, increasing the workforce participation rate, so that the guy that Scott mentioned, who should probably be retiring and selling his business, is doing that rather than flipping burgers or whatever it might be. So those economic inclusion things could be things like the earned income tax credit, like finally Lansing getting their act together on that, or the workforce opportunity tax credit, doing something like that in the state of Michigan, to create tax credits for employers to hire people from, different sectors that don't maybe have challenges getting in the workforce. So I do think on the margins, there are definitely things they can do locally. I think local government leaders could do a lot from a housing perspective to support supply. We have a ton of NIMBYs across this state and nation, not in my backyard people. They want housing supply. They just don't want it where they have to drive by it or, see it. And we're trying to create coalitions here in West Michigan to support more of those dense housing options. So there's a number of things from a policy perspective, but I feel like I could keep going, so maybe I'll just stop there. Maybe Scott has some better prescriptions.
Well, Andy, you're right, and yes, we reaped the benefits. That's what I'm saying. My members were doing great, bouncing out of COVID, and like I said, I know some that had some record sales and record years or months coming out of it. But I think a couple things. We're not there yet. I think we're going to see that kick in the teeth here very soon. Like I said, 53% said they plan on reducing it. So we're not even there. We could have this 2, 3, 5, I don't know how many months down the road, and we really could be in it. But I'm not an expert like Joanne, and I'm I do think that this happens on a normal basis. I think that we do have these cycles that happen. I remember, in the 80s, I think it was the 80s, I was young. I just remember my parents going through these type of things. And I remember them talking about not having money and cutting back on the things that we did at the time. I think, I don't want to say it's a natural thing, but I do think it's a cycle, and maybe Joanne can touch on that. But I think, as far as policy, we have the legislature and the governor in the last 2 years since COVID and during it has done a lot for our industry. And I don't ever want that to go by, the House and the Senate and the governor's office actually did work together to do things that has helped our industry and permanent changes. Social districts, and Grand Rapids is a thriving social district. Lansing has it, it's just not used as much. Drinks to go. I honestly go into bars and restaurants now and I sit and watch these carry orders. They now have a drink to go that someone is taking home. Now, does that totally turn their business around? No, but every little bit helps. So I do have to give credit where credit's due. The legislature and the administration did do a lot for us. They're still communicating with us on a regular basis. I don't think we can policy our way out of it, except for like Andy said, making it more business friendly. And I do think it's a lot on the locals. I don't know the answer, and we meet here in the Lansing area on a regular basis, but I think if they live here, they will spend here. And I do agree. And that's what I saw in Grand Rapids. And yes, I did spend a lot of money, Andy. But I just, I do think that we have to be patient and we have to ride this wave. It's just how we adapt to it during, and we try to help the ones we can to carry along.
Sandi, how about that housing policy? Anything you'd want to add from the state perspective?
Well, I think that we need to really look at zoning. I think we need to make it easier to add density. We have to add more units. There's no way that a president, a governor, a mayor can create a housing policy that's going to change the fact that we're underbuilt, and this goes back pretty much through the last 15 years as we had our major builders pull out of Michigan, and it really is a nationwide problem at this point, is that we underbuilt. And so we need to do things like the zoning. We need the Michigan Realtors was instrumental in bringing a first-time home buyer savings program in, and that is going to be useful. People can start investing now and get a tax deduction for that investment, and that can grow and then be used by children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews to stay in Michigan and give them a nest egg to start purchasing a home. That will help. But really it's about the supply. Pop-up tax, we've, proposal A of 1994, I guess, was supposed to equalize our taxation. And what it does is kind of lock people in their homes, because not only now the sellers don't want to move because they don't want to change their mortgage rate, for instance, but they also don't want to change their taxes. If you go to an equal house down the street, your taxes are going to pop up 3 times. That's keeping people in the house and preventing, some movement in the market. So those are things that can be done at a statewide or really at a statewide level.
Thanks.
If I may jump in for,
sure.
Yeah, so I think I agree with all of these things. Are anything that will boost supply, whether that's labor supply, supporting people going back to the workplace, and childcare, for example, increasing housing supply. All of these things are things that will indeed help temper inflation in the long run, medium run to long run, because of course it'll take time, for all these housing units. If these policies are in place, it'll take a little bit of time for these units to come online. And so, I think these are certainly all policies that can help weather this business cycle over the long run. But like one of the previous speakers said, we do need to exercise some patience. I think there's not a lot that can be done, on a monthly basis, for example, to get inflation down right now.
I think in Michigan, we might look at the word recession a little bit differently from other places. We've always had it a little bit different. Remember the one state recession before the Great Recession. So we have this question from a reader about the impact of natural disasters such as the hurricane in Florida or forest fires in the northwestern states that affected the construction industry. It reminds me of people who are leaving Michigan like crazy to go to Texas or Florida or Vegas to build houses. We lost all of our home builders. People were trying to find jobs in the oil industry, things like that. So how I think of the workforce when I see that question, but it could affect us in other ways. What do you think the effect of the natural disasters across the US could be right now?
I think Joanne's cat wants to answer that question.
Again, going back to the hospitality industry, when we lose large industries, I was down in Texas during that oil boom. I was down there for a hunt with my dad, and the bars and restaurants and everything was just packed because everybody had moved there and everybody was living there. But then that all kind of, lack of better words, dried up. And my friends, he still lives there, and he'll talk about they were literally making containers into apartment type things to living. They just didn't have enough housing. That's all a boom for the hospitality industry. Thankful, we're in Michigan where we have a travel industry that bring people in, winter, summer. So going to the natural disasters and, like you said, taking off to Florida for the next 6 months to a year building. Yeah, I imagine we probably did lose some companies. They're going where the money can be made. I think that goes back to, we need to have a good workforce. We need an educated workforce. And then we need to help these small businesses want to stay here, right? To be able to build here or do what they do here. And so I do think, I don't have numbers or whatever, but I do think that we do lose people when these disasters happen and people go to make money and do what they got to do to help rebuild that area. And I agree with that, but we need to find a way to get them back here and keep them here.
A reader of your question about high profits that large companies are able to accumulate in this inflationary period. I find that interesting because, I know that I've been told recently, particularly in Frankenmuth, record-setting sales doesn't mean record-setting profits. So I think like on the ground, we might have one experience, but we're also seeing large companies, possibly oil companies, making a lot of money right now too, while there's some high inflation. Any thoughts about the pressure between all of those dynamics? Joanne, maybe you could field that?
Sure. I mean, I think this is something that some consumers are really concerned about. Like, I don't think that the data that I look at can really speak to that a whole lot. But I mean, I think it is certainly contributing to people's sort of negative emotions around the economy. The feeling that there are certain industries that are making record profits. And, even though consumers by and large expect to have income increases over the next year, they don't expect those increases to keep pace with inflation. So there's a fair amount of bad feelings among consumers on this.
Okay. We do have a reminder in the chat too that many of us paid mortgage rates of 18% in the 80s and we survived. My mom was one of them. So that might make you happy, Sandi.
I don't remember 18, but I remember a lot of years at 10%.
My first house, I mean, I still talk about it now. I think it was 10%. Well, this would have been in the mid 90s. And, you were at 7, 8, 9% then. And we were happy because my parents did have 18 and, that type of thing. But I think what everybody forgets is, yes, we can do that. And we have that higher mortgage rate, but guess what? That takes money out of my pocket to go do the other parts of the society or economy, right? So my mortgage rate's up because of interest. Now I have less money to spend, and I'm going back to my industry, the hospitality industry. I can't go out. I can't go to the movies. I can't do the things I do because that extra $100, $150 a month is now going to my interest rate. So it's that trickle down from that. And yes, we'll survive. This is what we do, but it is definitely something that impacts trickle down.
So it's very tempting to ask all of you for advice. What should we all do? But none of us are financial advisors, right? So instead, I want to ask you, what numbers are you watching the most closely? Like what should we take from what you're watching so that we can make our own decisions and guide our own spending, saving, finances?
I am not legally, I cannot give anyone financial advice on that. I would say from a Chamber of Commerce perspective, I'm always looking at new job openings or new, and how that's trending. I think that's a good indicator that I like to see where kind of confidence is going forward. And then I think from an advice perspective in general for business, it's hold on to the great people, right? Plug those extra profits back into wages, back into retention. And, as many of us know, people usually don't leave jobs because of wages. It's because their boss sucks, right? So how can you be a better boss, create a better workplace culture? I think those are the folks that are really going to be successful going forward because, I think Joanne said it. I don't know if I had the right, on my bingo card of who's going to say unprecedented, but these unprecedented once in a lifetime events are going to keep happening. They do, whether it's 9/11 or a pandemic or the Great Recession, or you just got to be prepared to cope with those, and having the strong culture at your workplace and organization to adapt to those is important. And I think right now, another thing is just taking all the information that's coming our way and trying to distill it on what's really important, because like a quote I saw the other day, my desire to be informed is at direct odds with my desire to stay sane. And it seems to be getting worse every day, especially the closer we get to an election.
Oh dear.
A couple of things. I do think regardless of the outcome of this election, things hopefully will start changing again. When we have some security of know what's happening, regardless of whether we agree, disagree of who's in charge, the fact that something is set does, and Joanne probably can say that, but it does affect the economy when we know who our governor is, we know who our legislature is going to be. I think that makes a difference. The other thing, this is not really on economy based or spending. It's my biggest thing that I've been telling people, and I do it when Paul, I think you've had when we've had interviews, be nice to the other people. Our society, and this is off money, but my industry, it gets kicked a lot because people just demand all this treatment and all this, it's got to be perfect. And so I really throughout all this, through the pandemic and through this now economic times, I really tried to teach my kids and stress, just try to be more patient. It's not financial advice. Sorry, I'm not legally allowed to give that either, but I can give be nice advice. And I think if we can operate in that manner on a regular basis, it helps reduce the fear that a lot of us currently have if we're in a good environment when we go places, whether it's a restaurant, whether it's a workplace. Try to, and I hope that helps.
I love that. Sandy, what numbers should we be watching that you watch?
Well, mine are different. I'm looking at the time on the market for properties, what the average are. How long is it taking to sell a house? How many listings are coming on versus how many are selling? And I do that more locally than statewide, certainly. But that's the crux of what's going on with how many offers are we getting in on houses? Are we getting 10 offers? Are we getting 2 offers? Are they selling at list price, or for a while it was 117% of list price? I kind of like it more level, because I think it's easier on everybody, including the sellers, believe it or not.
Thank you. And Joanne, obviously we watch consumer sentiment. Are there any other numbers you would suggest that we watch that are very important to you? Or how do we recognize the changes in it as meaningful?
So what I'm watching going forward specifically is, as you mentioned, we had our record low consumer sentiment that we hit in June. We've seen a little bit of improvement since then, but so far, in my opinion, it's still tentative. We had a 1-month jump in August, and since then it's basically stalled out. I wouldn't put too much stock in little wiggles in any numbers. And so, it remains to be seen as a lot of these uncertain factors, global factors in particular, start to unfold, whether we can be on a sustained upward trajectory. I think the main thing that I would pay close attention to is the labor market. Right now, we still are at historically low unemployment rates, but seeing where those weaknesses are starting to come up. What industries, what types of jobs are being lost, because I think that is going to be the harbinger of reduced consumer spending going forward.
Great, thank you. Appreciate all of this. Here's great comments, great reactions here. Amber, I'm going to kick it back to you.
Thanks, Paula. And thank you, Scott, Joanne, Andy, Sandy, for joining us today. I have learned a lot today. I have a feeling that our readers who have joined us today have as well. Paula, thanks for moderating. And thank you to all of you who joined us, who spent your lunch hour with us. We really appreciate it. Just a reminder that we were recording today, and we'll be posting that recording at bridgemi.com this week, probably today or tomorrow. And then we will be resuming this monthly lunch break series sooner than we normally do, because we are going to do a sort of election results rundown on November 9th, the day after the election. Announcement about how to register for that event will be coming in Bridge very soon. And that is all. Thank you so much to all of you, and have a great day. We'll talk to you again soon. Bye.